we should expect from our city officials, and not just our elected officials, but also city leaders, our staff people at City Hall, the people whose salaries we pay. I firmly believe that our local government needs to be transparent. They have an obligation to tell us what they're doing and how they're doing it. I would like for them to be responsive. One of my biggest complaints as the chair of LAN is that in the 11 and a half months I've been doing it, I have sent innumerable emails, I have called, I have sent postal letters to the mayor. He has not called me back or emailed me back once. He has never so much as acknowledged my attempts to contact him regarding specific issues. I think, and it's not just about me, I think it's extraordinarily disrespectful for someone in that political position to just ignore the citizenry. That's not right. They need to be responsive. I'd like for them to be honest. I would like for the kind of shenanigans that went on for 9th and New Hampshire to not happen again. I'd like for there to be some concern for social and economic equity. We have a number of communities and folks in this town that have real economic struggles. And I worry that we spend an awful lot of money subsidizing unneeded development for commercial purposes, and we neglect the most vulnerable in our community. I like ethics and leadership. I think that speaks for itself. And ultimately, I'd like for City Hall to concern itself with the interests of the community as a whole and not just a few. Next slide, please. So what can you do? Well, the first thing you can do is, if you're not already a member of your neighborhood association, please join. If you don't know who your neighborhood association contacts are, I can get that information for you. If you don't know what neighborhood you live in, we can help you figure that out. You may live in a neighborhood that doesn't have a neighborhood association. You can start one. Another thing that I think folks really need to be willing to do to participate in the process and ensure the best possible outcomes for the community at large is to follow the money. Look who provides subsidies, who receives subsidies, and look who provides donations to candidates for city commission. The money is pretty transparent if you go back and look at where it's coming from. I would implore you to go out and meet your neighbors and get involved. Even if you don't really want to join your neighborhood association, pop in for a meeting and just see kind of what's going on and who's participating. When there's a call for a big issue like Rock Chalk Park or the SLT or a Taco Bell next to your house, come down to City Hall. Numbers matter. Bodies in the room matter. The commission pays attention to how many folks we can get to show up. And when there's an issue on the docket that concerns you, if you can, take the time to go down and watch the meeting. There's a lot of stuff happening with neighborhoods on social media. The internet has really made it a lot easier to do that kind of organizing, and many of the neighborhood associations are very active on Facebook. If you're a Facebook person, check that out. We can help you find those contacts. Write letters to the editor. I've been a long time writer of letters to the editor, some of which have gotten me in trouble at work and at home, but that's okay. So if you have an opinion, express it. Make sure that City Hall can hear you from lots of different angles. I think letters to the editor can be very effective. I also think we all need to help elect candidates to the City Commission that care about neighborhood issues and preservation of the community at large. The last one on this list has been one that's been very hard for me to firmly adopt, and I still struggle with it. I'm not the most diplomatic person. Be polite but persistent. When you communicate with city officials, be respectful. It does not help to get up and just rant and call them names, as much as I want to do that sometimes. But be persistent. Continue and ask questions. Be willing to ask why. And try and hold them to answering that question when you're at the podium if you can. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I would just like to thank the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods for a most illustrative and edifying 11 and a half months. My term ends in December, and for a variety of reasons, I'm not able to serve again next year. But I am very grateful to the folks in the neighborhoods that have taught me so much and given me an incredible opportunity to learn the the verve and courage that this community possesses and the work that really we can do when we work together. I also thank you for inviting me here today, and I'm glad to entertain any comments, challenges, or questions you may have.
I was wondering, do you know anything about a permanent friendship center
A permanent what center?
Transit.
for budgets? I mean, we were at Northern New Hampshire.
Yeah, and then they've been moving it. I know that the city commission hired a consultant who, and this is classic, came back with 3 proposed sites, none of which had they even vetted or talked to the neighborhoods about before they threw them up on the projector at City Hall and said, here's what we think. And they got shut down pretty quickly at that meeting. The last I heard, the permanent transit center that they were looking more into would be located behind the Mercantile, Community Mercantile, on 9th and Iowa.
Yeah.
So I don't know any more about that. I heard a lot of folks really disappointed that they didn't build it into the parking ramp that we bought and paid for at the library downtown. That would have been, I think, in my opinion, a logical location for it. Yes?
This may be a small issue, but I just noticed something in my neighborhood, maybe about 3 weeks ago. There's a single-family residence. It has 5 cars parked out in front of it. And so I've been kind of watching a little bit, and there are 5 individual people driving a car parked there, and they're all living in this very, rather small little Cracker Jack box, single-family house. What can I do?
Let me ask you if you know this. Is your neighborhood zoned single-family dwelling?
19th and Haskell.
I don't know without looking at my zoning map. So the first question would be that question, okay? So if you are in a protected area of zoning, they're not allowed to do that. There's restrictions on how many unrelated people can live in a single-family zoned house. The second thing I would say is that Brian Jimenez is the code enforcement officer for the city of Lawrence. He would be the first person to call who can help you answer that question, can also help you address whether or not that's something that's allowable under city code. That sort of situation happens all over town. It is one of the reasons that land has fought so hard for rental registration and inspection, because right now we don't even have a comprehensive baseline list of what rental properties exist.
I assume that things like that don't get resolved unless somebody in the neighborhood complains, that the city can't.
That is true. Yes, the city does not have the resources to go out and police that unless someone makes them aware of it. And in some cases, just making them aware of it is not going to be enough. You have to be persistent and polite. Yes?
Yes, I'm curious. I've only lived in Lawrence for a year and a half. But when I moved over here after my husband died, I moved just simply because where I lived in Kansas City, although we had sidewalks, bus service was few and far between. It would have been, the grocery store was too far away, and I would have to walk to it, up and down a sizable hill, and I thought, that's just not going to work, so I came over here and moved in with my daughter. But what I'm wondering about is sidewalks. Over there where in Kansas City where I live, the owners of the properties weren't supposed to be the ones to keep up the sidewalks, but if they didn't keep up the sidewalk, then the city would come in and do whatever needed to be done, and I guess put a lien on the property. Where I live in East Lawrence, those street sidewalks in many places are in such terrible shape they're almost dangerous to walk on. And places, where you can't even tell the sidewalks there, it's so grown over with grass. And I'm wondering, does anybody do anything about that?
Well, that's an interesting question and a beautiful segue to one of my announcements. The question was generally about the condition of sidewalks in Lawrence and what, if anything, is being done or can be done. Tonight at 7 p.m. in the basement of the Carnegie Building downtown, the Lawrence Pedestrian Coalition will be meeting. We meet monthly, the second Wednesday of every month. Lawrence Pedestrian Coalition is a joint project of the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods and the League of Women Voters. We are trying to address that very issue. Last week at the City Commission, we presented a memo with some policy recommendations asking the city to take another look at the way the current ordinance is structured. Because right now, in the city of Lawrence, you are responsible for your sidewalk if you have one, and that's part of the equity issue. So it's a big problem. East Lawrence has major sidewalk issues. Centennial has no sidewalks, but that's still an issue. So all over town, we have a lot of problems with the safety of sidewalks, the maintenance of sidewalks, connectivity of sidewalks, and we have a group that is actively working to try and come up with some solutions.
I served on land for a decade, and and it was one of the issues that I tried to deal with. And just for perspective, this is a tough issue. There's a lot of complications, and land has been struggling with this for at least 20 years. And still, we haven't been able, we found solutions in some areas. We've made a little bit of progress, but there's a lot of problems.
One of the broader solutions or proposals that we're suggesting that the city take a look at is the creation of one of two funding mechanisms to have a dedicated source of revenue with which to repair and improve sidewalk and pedestrian facilities generally. One would be a sidewalk utility, would be a fee added to your water bill, kind of like recycling. The other would be getting a piece of that dedicated infrastructure sales tax that was passed a number of years ago, and the vast majority of which has been used to build roads. We'd like to have a piece of that pie to be put into pedestrian infrastructure. Now, neither of those have political legs at this point, but it is something that we're definitely talking about. Yes?
How do you get around the fact that it is a state statute that property owners are responsible for the sidewalk in front of their property?
I can't answer that question. We are aware of that issue. I do believe that David Corliss and the city auditor are working on the larger policy.
They've been working on it for several years.
I know they have. We got their attention last week, though. We had, we basically packed the city commission chambers specifically about sidewalks. It was a very well-attended meeting. So what I told the sidewalk group when we started meeting was, this is probably going to take 10 years. It sounds like it was already taking 20 and we're not there yet. I won't give up if you won't. That's all I can promise. Yes?
Laura, let me give you a little bit of background, particularly in Centennial. One of the things years ago, and more than probably 40 years ago, when we tried to get sidewalks in that area, we found great opposition from the property owners because they didn't want to have to take care of a sidewalk on their property. So their children, along with all of the rest of them, walked in the streets, and we were told at that time, well, the city owns 7 feet of right-of-way, so just tell the children to walk down in people's yards, which seemed the wrong thing to do, but what are you going to do when it isn't safe? But eventually, the city did pick up sidewalks in that area to get the children to the elementary schools and the high school. Even the school district wouldn't build sidewalks on the school property. My children walked in the street or in the mud to go to high school because there were no sidewalks at that time. And I keep wondering, and I know it's an idea that will not float anywhere politically. If we're going to build all these roads for all of these cars, it seems to me that we have a similar public responsibility to build a way for pedestrians to use their feet on some kind of a walkable surface.
I agree.
But it's
couldn't
not
agree
going-
more.
The traffic commission years ago appointed a sidewalk committee, and I'm sure the group you're speaking of came from that.
No, we are entirely
Well, I know you are
born,
now, but I
born
think
independent
some
of the city.
People in that were those who
Carol Bowen,
started
yeah.
that. And it grew to the extent that it became its own entity, which is a good thing to have happen. But these are issues that have been around for 50 years at least, many of them. And many of the sidewalk issues are in neighborhoods where the people cannot afford to
Right.
do it themselves. And at one point, there was money available for people to ask, and I've forgotten what group came through. But no one was asking for that money to build sidewalks in that neighborhood, so it went someplace else.
Well, and one of the things that the Pedestrian Coalition has been successful in doing a couple of times now is we continue to see developers come to the city commission and the planning commission to request a variance from the code that requires sidewalks on both sides of the street. It's 2013, people, really, are we gonna have this conversation? And we decided, yes, we are. And so the last 2 times that a developer went before the city commission and asked for a variance, we went to, and we said no. And they actually listened to us.
Well,
So
that's good.
we gotta start somewhere. I mean, it's an intractably difficult issue.
It
I hear
is,
you.
Because the
Yes.
developers don't want to do it, it's money.
Can you explain to me if there's any rationality in the city commission allowing all these new apartment complexes to start in and be built in large numbers? Aren't we just super saturated already, and what is their rationale for that?
It's a great question. Better than 50% of the residential housing in our community is rental properties, folks. I mean, we are exacerbating that imbalance, in my opinion, and it adds a lot of problems that I think individual residential homeowners have to absorb. Parking, party house complaints, crime. When we build all these new fancy complexes on the sprawly outer edges of town, in many cases, the rental properties closer into the city become blighted. They're not being maintained, their property values drop, as do the property values for the folks who live around them. I've asked to try and get a sense of what our vacancy rate is in this community for rental properties. I've not gotten an answer to that question. It's a valid concern, and what I think is also very problematic for this community is, in spite of this great bolus of rental properties, try being a renter in this town who is low to moderate income. It's a very expensive place to be a renter, and the quality of the rental housing stocks in some cases is horrific. So if you're poor and you're renting, you really don't have a lot of recourse. So one of the things that, my hometown is Iowa City, Iowa, and Iowa City had a similar situation, university town, very similar demographics to Lawrence, about 20 years ahead in terms of population and development. What they did is they collaborated between City Hall and the university to try and buy back some of the rental stocks, not the big apartment complexes, but the houses, and turn them back into single-family homes. And I'm hoping, this is my personal opinion, if rental registration and inspection passes, we will see some folks get out of the landlord business because there's going to be regulations that it's going to cost them money to comply with. That may change the marketplace balance a little bit. But again, it comes down to, these are decisions to build 150-unit apartment complexes are being made by people that we elect and put in office in City Hall. And if we don't like the decisions that they're making, we need to go down and let them know that we don't like that. That's, in the final analysis, kind of what needs to happen. Yes?
My question is about downtown rather than neighborhoods, but still, want everybody.
Downtown is a neighborhood. They have a representative on land.
Oh,
Yes?
okay. Doug Compton proposes to build a 7-story building across the street from the county courthouse and the Watkins Museum. Could you comment on that?
Land has not taken a position on that project yet. We just really broached it for the first time at our October meeting. I know that East Lawrence is watching it very carefully, as is the folks that are involved in the downtown Lawrence group. My first comment about it, again, my personal opinion, I think that it should not receive a public subsidy, okay? A lot of people have said that live downtown, and I get a lot of feedback. People stop me in the grocery store, and they call me and email me as if I have some power, which I don't. But one of the comments that I heard from a number of downtown dwellers was, we really need a drugstore downtown. And I get that. If you live downtown, now you have to drive to the burbs, or at least to the Dapper Dillons there en masse to get your prescriptions filled. It makes me sad that we had a beautiful little drugstore in the Round Corner Drug that's no longer there, but we have about 12 CVS's around town. So I don't know enough about that project to have much of an informed opinion, other than I really don't want to subsidize it personally. Yes.
Two issues that you just asked about. That property, we had much stronger arguments against the one right across the street from it that you see that is a big hole right now, and it's going up. My belief is that our grounds for fighting the next one are much weaker. That's going up. You might be just a question of whether it's going to be 7 stories or 6. And I don't want this to all be too discouraging, but the neighborhoods in the last few years have made huge inroads. Today, I've been in the neighborhood association for 20 years, and when I started out, the city, not only did they not consult us, but we could all go there en masse, 100 people in there, and they'd still vote against us. And today, when developers come to them to develop something in East Lawrence, they send them to us first.
Right. And
with
that's
their
how it should be.
ideas.
Yeah.
Also, the brick streets, sidewalks, the sidewalks, we've gotten tens of thousands of dollars over the year that we've put into the sidewalks in East Lawrence alone. And we've been able to get around those state restrictions about people doing their own sidewalks pretty easily. So it's not a big deal.
Kansas has very strong home rule authority constitutionally. The way that state law is structured, a great deal of deference is given to the local municipality to deal with things like that. So I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that there's some pretty good arguments to be had. Under the current administration, I don't know how true that is, but James,
Yeah, Laura.
here's a sidewalk person right
Yeah,
now.
sidewalk person. The Community Development Block Grant Advisory Committee, they, in the past, have helped fund and sidewalks. And
Yep.
sometimes proposed. Do you want to make any comments about what they're looking at, you know, what's happening? in the
Yeah,
back?
I can't speak too specifically to CDBG funding, other than I know generally there's not a whole ton of money flowing through that pipeline. In my opinion, the issue of sidewalks in Lawrence is problematic enough that that simply is not going to be a sufficient fix. We need a wholesale, overarching examination of our infrastructure. And in the same way that the Traffic Safety Commission, the Public Works Department, the City Transportation Engineer, and the Budgeting Department look at roads and road building, we need to do the same thing for sidewalks and sidewalk repair. Any other questions? Nobody's going to challenge me? I was really hoping I'd get an argument today.
Very friendly crowd.
Be careful what you wish for.
Oh, no, bring it on.
To what extent, if any, does the land work with the local emergency planning commission or the emergency response teams? Because you mentioned mutual aid or mutual assistance earlier.
To the best of my knowledge, we have no formal relationship. It's a terrific idea. I was on the LEPP when I lived in Vermont, and I think, you know, witnessing the horrific situation that's happening right now in the Philippines with this most recent storm is really a wake-up call for me, how dependent we are on infrastructure and the government, in many cases, to provide relief in the event of natural disasters. And it doesn't seem like natural disasters generally are getting any less frequent. So I